Greetings to all Africans on the continent and around the world. This is King H, the radical Pan-African activist from Ambazonia, aka Ambas Bay. Africans, there's a lot that is going on around the world, and we need to examine what is going on so that we can understand it and use it for our own advantage. Today, my discussion is based on BRICS. This organization that involves Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, and many other nations that are trying to be involved in the BRICS. If we look at the world is structured based on power. And the reason why Africa is not growing is because they don't understand structural power. The G7, which is made up of 7 Western nations, is a structure of power that controls the world. The G7 nations are also part of the G20. And in the G20, they have influence, great power in the G20, but they don't completely control the G20. But they have great influence over the G20. As a matter of fact, African Union is not part of the G20. The only African country that's actually part of the G20 is South Africa. No other African nation is part of the G20, I believe. But if Africa wants to grow, if the countries in Africa wants to grow and become more independent, because African nations are not independent, they will have to restructurize themselves and create power. And BRICS is that pathway that would lead to African countries in the 5 regions of the continent of Africa to have power and to restructurize power so that they can use power to execute what is needed in the continent of Africa from their nations, from their countries, and across the region of Africa. So, G7 is great power. G20, the G7 nations have great power over the G20. They also have the European Union, which is a great power that has influence in Africa. But Africa doesn't have influence in the European Union. Africa doesn't have influence in G7. African Union or African nations or African Union does not have influence in the G20. But Africa needs to create the power structure they need in order to have influence in the global political arena. And Africa has a chance to uplift themselves, to uplift themselves in this structure of power by joining BRICS. And it's not every African nation that has the potential, the opportunity, or the capability to join BRICS, but there are certain African nations that have those ability, those capability, those required needs that they must have in order to join BRICS. And I'll talk about some of the countries that are already joining BRICS in the continent of Africa, and countries that also need to consider joining BRICS in the continent of Africa. Egypt has decided to join BRICS, and I think they have taken the application. BRICS has taken the application of Egypt. Algeria is also joining BRICS. But not all countries in Africa can join BRICS. But those that can should. And it should come from the 5 regions of Africa. It should come from West Africa. Nigeria is interested in joining BRICS, and Nigeria is in West Africa, in the heart of West Africa, and Africa in general. But Nigeria needs to join BRICS, especially after the election that they're going to have this Saturday on February the 25th. Hopefully, a good leader is chosen so that he could lead the continent, so he could lead Nigeria, which will help lead the continent of Africa. We need one or two nations in East Africa. Hopefully Ethiopia. Maybe Tanzania should also put the application because they need to. There are nations in Africa that will never be accepted in the G7, in the European Union. Morocco, as a matter of fact, at one point decided to join the European Union or the European continent, and Morocco was denied because Morocco is not in the continent of Europe, but is in the continent of Africa. But they did that. That is how much hatred Morocco has against Africa. They don't want to be part of Africa to the point that they decide to apply to be part of the European continent, and access was denied because Morocco is in Africa. Moroccans are technically Arabs. They left from the Arab region and came to Morocco, and then they think they could join European continent. Meanwhile, Morocco is in the continent of Africa. But then again, the access was denied. But we need countries in East Africa, either Ethiopia, Tanzania, should join BRICS. Not all African nations can join. Not all African nations should join. But certain African nations need to join BRICS. And certain African nations need to be part of so-called democracy of the world, which will show some kind of allegiance or support to Western nations, but not complete support. It just has to seem as if they have support. Because Africa needs to understand how power needs to be restructured in order for African nations to have power. Because we need power, political, economic power, even spiritual power, to make things happen in the continent of Africa. And by joining BRICS, that is another possibility. Southern Africa, we already have South Africa that's part of BRICS, and South Africa is bringing in other African nations to be part of BRICS. I hope Zimbabwe has a chance to join the BRICS, because Zimbabwe is one of the nations that has been hit hard with sanctions from Western nations, because they took the lands that belongs to Africans from whites and gave to Africans. So Western nations are angry. Till today, Zimbabwe is still being sanctioned. That way the people of Zimbabwe will suffer the action that they took. Central Africa region needs to be part of the BRICS, and hopefully the big Congo can also apply for BRICS. I don't know if they're considering doing it, but they should. The reason why I say that countries in the 5 regions of Africa needs to join the BRICS is because that would also help in changing the economic structure of Africa. When one of those nations in those regions becomes stronger economically, it helps the nations in those regions to grow as well. So we need to join the BRICS, because if you look at Western power, it's not structured based on individual nations, but it's structured based on group power. Yes, in the Western nations, United States is the strongest power, but United States also needs other Western nations in order to have access to global power. So if African nations want to thrive in this world, they will have to work as a group, from their region. must work as a group from the African Union. Because if we work as a group based on our region, we'll grow our economy. Countries in West Africa, take for example, Nigeria, will grow stronger so long as Nigeria works with other West African nations. And those other West African nations working with Nigeria will also help boost their economy, make them stronger. Their currency will go further. And if they work with other regional nations across Africa, that will help boost the economic power of those nations in the continent of Africa. We need to do this in order to grow our power. The African Union doesn't have power in the world. The African Union is not respected, and it's not respected because the structure, the regional structure, are not doing what is needed to support the African Union. The African Union cannot do all this by itself in the continent of Africa. The African Union needs to work with the regional structure of power, and the regional structure of power needs to increase their power, their influence in the world. And they cannot do that by being silent. Africa must grow her power. And this is an opportunity to join for certain African nations across the 5 regions to join BRICS. Because G7, Western power, have controlled the world for so long and will continue to control the world for so long as nations in the world do not step up and do something. And if Africa does not step up by joining BRICS, then Africa will not have the power or help create the power it needs to speak loudly in the world. I hope the president of Nigeria is selected or voted in, and great things happen in the nation of Nigeria, because Nigeria is the heart of Africa, and Nigeria is the heart of West Africa. Nigeria needs a better leader, and Africa needs better Nigeria for all Africans. This is King Angel. Till next time.